Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we started recording episodes virtually instead of being in the same room together. This created technical issues for us for many weeks. Our sound issues get better beginning with the pros and cons episode. In the meantime, we appreciate your patience with the sound issues that are present in this episode. Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and me.
Hey guys!
Hello!
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 Hello! Now we're just gonna get weird.
I think I started that way.
Just say hello back and forth as many times as we can.
Hello!
Alright. Sound like a parrot. Anyways, hi guys. Thanks for being here with us. So today we are talking about another distress tolerance skill called willingness. And the flip side to willingness is this other term called willfulness. Similar sounding, very different states of being. And it's hard to talk about willingness without talking about willfulness. So we're going to be talking about both today. And also, I think it's important to mention and reference back real briefly the skill of radical acceptance that we talked about last week, because Kate and I typically, when we're teaching groups, we teach radical acceptance and willingness versus willfulness all in one night, which is a lot of material to give people. But there's a lot of distress tolerance skills to fit into 8 weeks. So we teach those two things in tandem. And this skill of willingness is very similar to radical acceptance. So it's a nice skill that goes with radical acceptance that we talked about a week ago. I don't know. It's like radical acceptance's sibling, cousin, something like that. They're very similar. And practicing willingness is typically the first step to getting to radical acceptance. So that may wind up coming up a little bit in our conversations.
Willingness is radical acceptance light, or willingness is radical acceptance
for like small things. Yeah. Radical acceptance is typically about big life events, and willingness is more like a smaller dose. Yeah, for day-to-day stuff. Exactly. So hopefully this will make sense as we go along. And similar to how we did our radical acceptance episode, before we really get into talking about the skill itself, we're each going to tell you some personal stories again about how we've seen this show up in our lives, both being willing and being willful. So yeah, go for it, Kate. Tell your story.
Ooh,
I like your story.
I know, it makes me laugh at myself in a good way. So a little bit of backstory. My family, especially my mother, most of my growing up has been especially fond of Christmas traditions, and a bit of that has been passed on to me as a human being. I am fond of my traditions as well, and one of those has been for I don't even know, a huge amount of my life. I went to the same Christmas tree farm with my mom every year. It was a cool Christmas tree farm. There were, I don't know, not rides, that sounds like an amusement park. Like,
attractions?
Tractor rides, whatever. And there were reindeer you could pet, and goats you could feed, and baby animals, and it was all very fun and cute, and hot chocolate and cookies and quote-unquote Santa. All that stuff. All the good stuff. But eventually, I not only was an adult, but I was an adult who lived very far away from that place. So I had found a place closer to my home that had a lot of the same elements, but did not involve a 2.5-3 hour drive to and from, as well as, cutting down the tree and picking it out and all that other nonsense. So I wanted to go to this place. Come the day that we had decided to go Christmas tree shopping. Christmas tree shopping. Goodness gracious. My household had decided they didn't want to go there. I don't remember if it was too expensive or too far away, even though it was a lot closer than the other place. I don't actually remember why, but I had been outvoted. And a little bit of backstory for me, I have been polyamorous a lot of my adult life, and so at the time it was myself and my husband and my wife and my wife's husband and my boyfriend and my ex. I think that was all of us. And we all lived together in a happy household, but all of them wanted to go to a different Christmas tree farm. And so, here's the willfulness part of my story. To begin with, that day when I found out that they didn't want to go where I wanted to go with, I think I might have literally crossed my arms across my chest. Maybe it was just figuratively. Well, that was the feeling, right? When you cross your arms across your chest and pout. I was like, you know what? Then I'm just not gonna go. I'm not gonna go, and they can go without me because it's not the way that I want it to be, and if it's not gonna be the way I want it to be, then I'm just not gonna go at all. That graduated a little bit to I'm gonna go, but I'm not gonna have fun. I literally thought that to myself. I'm like, I'm gonna go, but I'm just not gonna enjoy myself at all. Like not a prediction, but a decision. I just decided that because I couldn't have exactly what I wanted, I was gonna pout. That was it. There's no other word for it. I was gonna be a little stinker and pout and just show everybody how much not fun I could have, doing this thing. And I think it was literally having that thought of I'm not gonna have any fun. That actually helped to, wake me up to the attitude that I was having in that moment. And so I was able to pause and be like, well, that's a little silly, isn't it, Kate? Like, you're still gonna be with a bunch of people you love. You're gonna still be Christmas music and picking out a tree and, getting to cut it down and come home and listen to carols and drink eggnog and decorate. I mean, it's like the only thing that's wrong is it's not the exact location that you wanted. Maybe instead of deciding not to have fun, you could just go and have the fun that's available. Maybe that makes a lot more sense than just, I don't know. Yeah, it's so funny. People who know what I look like, I guess, but yeah, just arms crossed, pouting. I'm not gonna. So that's my favorite and most obvious, because I just caught myself so blatantly deciding to not enjoy myself, which I think is hilarious. So I don't know, lest you ever wonder if Michelle and I are human. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I was having a silly moment, and I was able to catch myself, but we all do this. That's a really blatant idea, but let me tell you, I'm still totally guilty of willfulness at times, that are maybe a little bit less blatant. Maybe even sometimes are that blatant, and I just either don't notice or don't fix it. So,
it's hard to catch when we're being really willful.
Yeah,
like
really
we're so in it.
It's pretty easy to catch, but when it's a little bit more subtle, it can be harder. But,
yeah.
Yep, that's my willful Christmas tree story. Is because I couldn't have exactly what I wanted, I was all set to just show them. I'll show you by not having any fun. I'm like, well, how old am I? 5? Like, what is going on here? So anyway, there you go. That's me. That's my willfulness turning into, thank goodness, willingness story, because I did have a lovely day in the end. By the way, the end is,
there's a good ending.
It was great. It was fun. I had a good time. It was a good day because I let it be instead of deciding it was going to be shit. So,
nice. Yeah, awesome. I feel like for me, I mean, mine is maybe a little more the sneaky willfulness that you were just referencing, because when I was trying to think about how willfulness and willingness shows up in my life, I'm sure if I really sat down and thought about it, I probably could think of a really specific situation, a really specific story, like you just shared, Kate. But mine is kind of, I guess, maybe a little more of like what is that? Like a montage, like a smashing together of a bunch of different situations that I'll share. A collage? Yeah, I don't know what quite the right word is, but the way that I see this show up for myself a lot is when I am going into social situations with people. So for me, I am introverted. That's an important part of my personality. And I am also, for any of you out there who know the Myers-Briggs, The Myers-Briggs is a personality assessment. You can Google it and take it. It's a lot of fun to see what your personality type is. But I am also what the Myers-Briggs would term a judger. So what that means isn't that I am judgmental in the way that like DBT thinks about judging, but it means that I am organized. I like a schedule. I like things to be predictable. I like to know what's going to happen, as compared to someone who scores as a perceiver, who is a little bit more go with the flow, laid back, whatever happens, happens. That doesn't really describe my personality. And I have worked really hard to try to shift that a little bit about myself, but it's still not my natural way of moving through the world. My natural way of moving through the world is that I like to know what's going to happen. I like to have a plan. And so if you combine these two parts of my personality together, if you look at the fact that I'm an introvert who also likes a schedule and organization, I see willfulness show up for me in social situations. And the way that I see it show up is that when somebody invites me to something, someone says, hey, come over to my house. I'm having people over for this type of gathering or whatever. My mind immediately starts to think about how I want it to go. I start to think about how long I want to be there for, what I hope it's going to be like, if there are people there that I already have met before, that I want to talk with those people instead of new people. I start to try to plan it out. And the biggest piece that I really try to control is the timing piece. And I do this with lots of things in my life. I've talked about this with my therapist more than once, about how I really do try to predict how long most things are going to take. Well, I'm going to spend an hour doing this. Oh, it's going to take me about 30 minutes to get there. I'm going to be there for 45 minutes. Then it's going to take me 30 minutes to get home. I'm just very time oriented to a fault. And this interferes with my ability to enjoy things sometimes. So when I have gone to many, many, many different types of social situations with people, I go in already a little willful because I already have this plan in my head for how I want it to go. And if I show up and if things don't go according to the plan that I had in my head, I do not enjoy myself. I do not have a good time. If I have set it in my mind that I'm going to be there for 2 hours and then the 2-hour mark comes, and let's say it's, I don't know, a kid's birthday party. Let's say, my friends who have children have invited me to one of their kids' birthday parties, and I'm expecting by the 2-hour mark, we will have had cake, we will have opened presents, we will have done like all the, required things of a birthday party, and then I'm going to leave. And let's say the 2-hour mark comes around, and we still haven't opened presents. I start to feel very willful because I'm like, I want to be getting home by now. I have things to do. It's really hard for me to get into this willing place of just like, this is how this is going. And sometimes, yes, there may be legitimate times where I actually have something else to do, like somewhere else to be. More often than not, though, it isn't that. It's just that I've decided this is how long I want to be there, and this is when I want to get home. Maybe, again, that's stemming from introversion or desire to just control. I don't know. Probably both. But I get willful when I'm at a social situation for longer than I thought I would be. Or when I feel like it's not going according to plan. Or when I'm struggling to interact with people with ease. I shut down and I start to resent being there. I don't want to be there anymore if it's not going the way that I think it should be going. And when I'm able to shift, and I've been able to do this a little more lately because over, the last year in therapy, I've started to really notice and see this as an issue and a problem. So over the last year in therapy, I've really been trying to make an effort to, when I'm going to spend time with someone, to just be in it, to not be watching the clock, to not be concerned about, the picture that I've painted in my head, trying to not paint a picture in the first place, just to relax and enjoy it. And part of that for me is making sure I'm intentionally, as best I can, not scheduling other things in that day, because that makes me feel rushed and hard to enjoy it. But I was able to actually do this, I think, pretty recently with my parents. Despite COVID and all, I went over there on Father's Day to see my dad. And we had a great evening. I was there for like 4 hours. I didn't even care. I wasn't tired by the time I left. I was truly in this willing place of just open to however things happened. And it feels really good to be able to get into that spot where I'm genuinely just going with the flow rather than trying to fit a situation into a box of my own creation, if that makes sense. That's how willfulness shows up for me. I try to control. And willingness for me looks like just relaxing and just, some of the mindful stuff we've talked about, but just being in the moment and participating fully in whatever the social situation is. So that's how I see it show up for me.
Nice. Good stories. Yeah, I really like that. Michelle, I like the montage. I think that makes sense.
It's a mashup of everything.
Yes. So, now that we've shared some personal stories, let's really dig into what is willfulness. So I'm gonna read through what DBT says about it, and then, apparently I'm just gonna keep hiccuping. And then sort of, add my own touch, I guess. So, what is willfulness? Willfulness is refusing to tolerate the moment. I see that as that sort of like, I'm just not gonna, this isn't going how I want, so, and anything other than what I want is intolerable, right, that idea. Willfulness is refusing to make changes that are needed, so that's I think that is also being sort of inflexible. Right, not able to go with the flow, which I think is a phrase that Michelle used a couple of different times in her story. Willfulness is giving up. This isn't exactly how I want, so I'm just not going to do it at all. Right, I give up, throwing in the towel. Willfulness is the opposite of doing what works. It's a little bit harder to explain, because it's not exactly because the opposite of doing what works would be doing what doesn't work, very intentionally, which certainly could be willfulness. But I think of it less like just opposite of doing what works to just I'm doing what I'm doing whether it works or not. Mm-hmm. I think is often kind of more how I view willfulness in that particular sense.
It also doesn't say it here, but I've seen it many times in other DBT worksheets where it describes willfulness as sitting on your hands.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's kind of what it's talking about here. You're right, there's doing what works and then there's doing what does not work. And then kind of this middle place is sitting on your hands and just doing nothing. And doing nothing, rarely works. Yeah, I'm just checking out. And that could be okay to some degree if let's say you're using stop and you're really intentionally taking a break and then coming back. But if you're just, I don't know, gonna give up, as it put it in the previous point, that's probably not going to work.
Yep. I like that. So willfulness is trying to fix every situation, which I think actually ties in with the next one, so I'm going to say them both, which is willfulness is insisting on being in control, right? The idea of trying to fix every situation assumes you can, which is not true. Right, and this idea that we can fix every situation often comes in the form of really wanting to be able to be in control. What is, what isn't, how it happens, when it happens, how it, where, all the things, right? Who, what, where, when, why, how. And that's just not feasible. So, something to let go of a bit there. And willfulness is attachment to me, and what I want right now. One of the things, Michelle and I debate about this, whether willingness is better viewed as a toddler or a teenager. I think she may have finally swayed me today to thinking teenager. I like it. Right, so I don't know. Just think about every stereotyped teenager in every 80s movie, right? That just, I don't know, back talking, I'm going to do what I want no matter how dumb it is, and I'm not going to go out with my family on vacation because it's lame and I'm not going to have any fun anyway, right? There's just this beautiful embodiment of willfulness. So if you need like an image or you need sort of a caricature or a stereotype to bring to mind for willfulness, I offer you, most teenagers in 80s movies as a way of showing an awful lot of willfulness. So maybe more recent movies too. I just watch fewer that involve teenagers. Though all of my nephews in just a little bit here this year, all of my nephews will be teenagers now.
Your poor sister.
Sister and brother-in-law.
Yep.
Sister and brother-in-law for one, and brother and sister-in-law for the other two.
Yep.
All the teenagers all the time.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know if that image helps you, but yeah, willfulness really is that. I do think like posture-wise of that crossing your arms and just being like stiff and closed off and inflexible and just I don't wanna. Right, is kind of being the anthem of willfulness is I don't wanna.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that. The only other thing I would add on, which I'm really surprised that DBT does not list it or use this word, but it's the simplest way that I typically explain what willfulness means to clients, is it's being stubborn. End of the day, that's what it is. Stubbornness.
Stubbornness to participate in a certain way. Like sometimes, I guess, I don't know, here's me taking it too far afield, but I like stubbornness in a lot of ways and in a lot of times. But the misapplication of stubbornness definitely hurts yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the misapplication of stubbornness.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. That's a good caveat there. All right, so that is willfulness, and then switching over to what is willingness. DBT describes willingness as doing just what is needed in each situation wholeheartedly without dragging your feet. So there's definitely an element of mindfulness here, because that's one of the things that comes up when we talk about the effectively part of how to be mindful, is doing just what is needed, not overdoing it, not underdoing it, finding that balance between responding in hopefully what is an effective way, and also being able to kind of let go of the outcome and being open. It also says willingness is listening very carefully to your wise mind and then acting from your wise mind. A willingness is acting with awareness that you are connected to the universe. And then it says to the stars, people you like and don't like, the floor, etc. So that last one's a little bit woo-woo. Yeah, it's a little weird. If that, resonates for you, awesome. But what I do think that one really gets at, which maybe in your story, Kate, like you were able to tap into this when you made the shift from willfulness to willingness, is that like recognizing that how we are does affect the people around us. And like if you had continued to be in a pretty bad mood all day, like that would have affected the other people in your household. And when we can recognize like, okay, yes, this is how I'm feeling in this situation. And, how do I want to be with the people around me? I don't want to ruin their good time, or like whatever may apply to the situation at hand. Sometimes that can help with making the shift into a willing place instead of a willful place. I don't know. I'm trying to think of other ways to describe willingness besides what DBT mentions. Do you have any other thoughts to add for what willingness is?
I don't know. I think of it maybe as like, you know what? Let's give it a try, right? Like that. I think it's like maybe like if willfulness is I don't wanna, right? I don't wanna. Then willingness is maybe like, you know what? Let's try.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what happens, right? Let's let what happens, right? Like instead of, I don't know, I do think this a lot with, I don't know, social situations or things, right? I don't know, how many times have you, I don't know, maybe I'm just going to bring stereotypes into it. Like, I don't know, go to a family event or something and be like, oh, this is going to be terrible, right? Like that sort of prediction that then you help create by embodying it, right? That's sort of willfulness. And so on the other hand is, you know what? I'm just going to show up and see what goes, right? I'm going to see what happens and let it be whatever it is. I think of that as kind of willingness. And also, yeah, I like the idea of, like, they talk about touching in with your wise mind, and that kind of, that being a good thing. Willfulness is well, I was gonna say wholly emotional mind, but I guess you could get into willfulness from being
in your reasonable
in
mind.
a reasonable mind.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's going to have different flavors.
Yeah.
But I think you can be willful if you're hanging out too much in either of those.
Like, these are just the facts and no one can dispute it, or
right.
something like that, maybe. Mm-hmm. But yeah, anyway, so either way, you're not in wise mind. There you go. I feel very comfortable saying that you are hanging out far too far in one or the other if you're in willfulness. And so just being able to look for and access your wise mind is already going to pull you a little bit more.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then, yeah, like they say, doing what is needed and doing, like, and this I think is sort of how it keys in with radical acceptance, because to an extent, willingness is also about engaging with what it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Part of my, I don't want to go to the goddamn Christmas tree farm with y'all, was, in a way, a very mild form of not accepting that was the option available to me.
Right. Yep.
All right, so this is sort of, I think, how it kind of comes down to, I don't know, radical acceptance light.
Yeah. Yep. The other DBT skills that I was actually just thinking about as you were talking is how willingness can also, I think, relate to check the facts and opposite action, because those two skills go hand in hand. But like when we check the facts of a situation and when we can recognize that our emotion and or its intensity does not fit the facts, and then especially if we choose to practice opposite action can look a lot like willingness in a lot of situations. You know, if your opposite action is telling you, or sorry, if you're in this state of mind where, like, let's say anxiety, right, is telling you, like, do not go to the grocery store. And if you check the facts and you realize, okay, like, going to the grocery store is probably going to be okay, and you decide to practice opposite action of the anxiety that you're feeling and you go to the grocery store, you're also simultaneously probably practicing some willingness to give it a try, to be open. I really like some of those phrases you were saying. So it all kind of bleeds together at a certain point. But that's another way to maybe think of it. If you like those skills of check the facts and opposite action and willingness, they're real good friends, I feel like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Very true.
Cool.
Speaking of a thing that is technically its own skill, but is it's
a bridge between like the willfulness and willingness a little bit, but yeah, it is its own thing.
It's a how.
Yeah.
To skill. It talks about turning the mind. In DBT, with the two sort of options being acceptance or rejection. And so I think this can be applicable to both radical acceptance and also to willingness, right? Is that you have to sort of turn your mind towards it. So the way they describe turning the mind is that it's like you're facing a fork in the road and you have to turn your mind towards the road of acceptance and away from the road of rejecting reality. So basically turning the mind is choosing to accept what is, choosing to accept reality. Though they are clear to point out that choosing to accept does not in and of itself equal acceptance. It just puts you on the road that direction. So I have decided to accept this thing as you're close. You're so close. You're not quite. You're not quite there. You're not wholly in acceptance yet. You've just started meandering that direction. So the sort of step-by-step process that they talk about for doing this turning the mind trick, you're going to notice this very first one bears an awful lot of resemblance to the first step in doing radical acceptance, which is observe that you're not accepting, right? That's pretty much the same idea. In fact, I don't know. Now I'm thinking really hard. Like, is there any skill that doesn't, whether they mention or not, sort of have to start with some form of noticing?
I think everything starts with observe. I mean, that's why we've got to talk about the mindfulness first. Like, check the facts starts with observe. Right? Like, everything starts with observe.
Notice that there's a problem, or notice how your thinking, is hurting you, or notice that you have an emotion, or notice that, right? Observe. You always have to, anyway, whatever. Sorry, meta. Weird meta. Anyway, so observe that you're not accepting. So this can mean looking for things like anger, or bitterness, or annoyance. Trying to avoid your emotions, saying things like, why me? Why is this happening? I can't stand this. My favorite, it shouldn't be this way. Right, so you just have to tune in, like, oh, I am not accepting right now. So next, go within yourself to make an inner commitment to accept reality as it is. I don't know why that always sounds so weird to me. It sounds very, well, I mean, you heard me go into my announcer voice. That seems weirdly self-helpful. Like,
make an inner commitment. It just sounds huge.
No, it's just like, so, I don't know. I apparently feel like that's a little cheesy. That's apparently what my brain... But, basically, it's notice that you're not accepting, be like, alright, I'm gonna do this.
I'm gonna try. Yep.
I'm gonna head that direction. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna work towards accepting, right? I don't know, inner commitment sounds, way too big. So, just decide. Go within yourself and be like, alright, I'm gonna stop fighting this a little bit. And then, do it again. Over and over, right? Keep turning your mind towards acceptance each time you come to the fork of the road where you can either reject reality or accept it. And we get more choices, or not more choices, more opportunities to make this choice than probably we're aware of, because when it doesn't cause problems, it's probably unconscious. Right? There's not a lot of times where we're like, I don't know, reality is, I don't know, there's gnocchi for dinner. And you're like, okay. I believe you. I accept that. All's well. That's reality. I'm cool. I'm on board. It's great. Awesome. Right? You are not noticing that you are choosing to, accept that gnocchi's for dinner. Because you weren't fighting it. You were like, it shouldn't be gnocchi. You know I hate potatoes. Why would you even cook me anything involving potatoes? Right? Then maybe it's something worth noticing. But most of the time, a lot of the time, we are choosing to accept reality. But it's not something we're aware of. This is not causing a problem or solving a problem. But there was no problem to create or solve. So, but when there is one, you have to do it over and over again, right? Every time you get this choice, you have, well, I was going to say you have to. You don't have to. You totally can choose to reject reality. It's just not going to go great. So, in which case, you're going to get another opportunity to do it differently. And then, last but not least, develop a plan for catching yourself in the future when you drift out of acceptance. And that is a lot of just noticing yourself. Like, what phrasing do you use? How do you talk to yourself? How do you best notice that you're not doing it, right? Are you more of just an emotion thing? Like, there are certain emotions that let you know that you're in this place? Is it more of an actual, way you talk to yourself about this shouldn't be this way, or that's not how this was supposed to turn out, or I can't stand this, right? Is it sort of that self-talk? Just pay attention, and yeah, I guess that's what I guess you could make a super formal, written out plan. That doesn't tend to be my way of doing things, but just, I think, all right, how can I catch this in myself? What's my best way? If you have a trusted other, you might be able to have them kind of get in on this with you. Be like, hey, you're saying this shouldn't be this way again. Is this, flag on the play? Do you need someone? Do you need to work on acceptance? But I don't know. So that's the idea. Turn the mind is just deciding to go towards accepting and doing it whenever you notice and can. Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Michelle?
Not so much. Just, I guess, some examples of, especially steps 3 and 4 with the do it again and develop a plan, because I feel like those two things both really apply to what I was discussing about how willfulness can show for me. Because for me, when I'm let's say leaving the house and driving somewhere, that's when I could be concocting a plan in my head. And then I have to make the choice, and I can try then of okay, I'm going to turn my mind towards being present and accepting what is. And then when push comes to shove, right? That moment that I talked about of I'm at the birthday party and 2 hours have passed and presents aren't opened or whatever, then I've got to do it again. There can be this before the thing happens, and then also while you're there, if things start going not as you expected, where you may need to do it again. And the developing a plan piece where if you notice for yourself, how I've noticed for myself, a theme of where willfulness shows up in your life. Whether willfulness shows up for you when you are with your family members, like you touched on a little bit, Kate, whether it shows up with certain people, whether it shows up in certain settings, then it can be really important. And again, in thinking about it, I don't even know, like, it's very unclear about what this plan would look like. I like your idea of, like, if you're with someone and you can share with them, like, hey, if I start to act this certain way, like, you know, like, kind of nudge me a little bit and tell me to go take a break and collect myself. You know, that's one way to do it. But I really just think it is about consistently working on it. And in therapy or just internally, I think this is going to be, a lot of internal observation work with you, which you also mentioned pretty nicely, of just like noticing and being aware that this may come up for you repeatedly in certain areas of your life. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So how do we be willing, Michelle?
How do we be willing? So, yeah, so if you're practicing all the stuff that Kate just talked about with turning the mind, of catching yourself not accepting, making a decision to accept reality and doing that as many times as you need to, chances are you're probably practicing some willingness. You're at least getting closer to being there. Because the steps to practicing willingness, there's a lot of common themes with what Kate just talked about with turning the mind. So first, observe the willfulness. Same step. Second, it says radically accept that at this moment you feel and may be acting willful. You cannot fight willfulness with willfulness. I think this can come up a lot. Where, like, being willful... No. We don't tend to like it when people around us are willful. We don't want to be that person. Like, it's not a good look. And it's just not. Like, and so when we're feeling willful, there can be this urge, I would say, to maybe deny it. Like, I don't know, Kate, in your situation, maybe there was this urge with the Christmas tree farm of, like, you didn't want to maybe actually admit that, like, your view was the problem. Maybe, like, so much easier to just be like, well, that Christmas tree farm isn't as good as the one that we normally go to, and blah 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 blah. Like, you know, I'm not the issue, the Christmas tree farm is the issue, or whatever. Like, you know, we don't want to look at, like, oh, it's me. Like, I'm really digging in my heels in this moment, I'm making the situation difficult. We don't want to look at that. So I think it can very easily be that we meet willfulness with more willfulness, even when we're not trying to. Yeah. So radically accept that at this moment you feel willful. Then it says turn your mind towards acceptance and willingness. So all the stuff that Kate was just talking about. And number 4, which I would say is maybe my favorite step out of this list here, which goes way back to week 3. I don't know. Our 3rd episode? It was a long time ago. But to do some half smiling. And to maybe have a willing posture. So that can look like practicing willing hands. Or just in general catching yourself. Because sometimes we do it without realizing it. With our facial expression. Or with crossing our arms. Or whatever it is that, like, our body language is clearly showing that we are being willful. And change the body language. See how that changes your internal experience. So once you've really noticed the willfulness and made the decision to turn your mind towards acceptance, half smiling or practicing willing hands is a good place to go. And then this is kind of like a bonus 5th step here, I would say, when it says, when willfulness is immovable, ask, what's the threat? Because again, going back
all the way back to
check the facts, I think. Yeah, yep. Because here's the thing that, like, when you look at it, a lot of times what really drives willfulness is fear. That's the emotion that drives that bus. Most of the time. It may be a super silly fear, right? My fear may be that if I don't leave a social event after 3 hours, like I've decided I'm going to, I'm afraid that that night I'm not going to have time to do the dishes or watch the show that I wanted to watch or get enough time to relax. That's not a threat in any way, but it's a fear. And maybe, like in your situation, Kate, maybe you were just afraid that that Christmas tree farm wouldn't be fun. Like you were worried that you weren't going to like it or enjoy yourself. But that's something that I think is actually a really good question to ask when we catch ourselves being willful, is like, what am I worrying about? And maybe that question fits a little more than what's the threat. Again, threat carries like some weight. But yeah, like what am I afraid of? What am I worried about? You know, what's the concern here? And chances are, if you look, you'll find something. Even if, again, it's kind of silly, you'll probably find something that you're worrying about that's leading to you acting in a willful way. So I like that DBT encourages asking that. And even though, I mean, it says, like, observe the willfulness, accept the willfulness, turn your mind, try half smiling and willing hands. You know, again, I feel like opposite action is another beautiful way to practice willingness. In lots of situations where we just try to look inside, which again, the opposite action is going to be different for each situation and each emotion, depending on what we're feeling. But again, if we assume that there's some fear behind the willfulness, what's the opposite action to fear? Facing the fear, going towards the thing. Yep, exactly. And the all the way opposite action would be doing that with openness and curiosity. So I really like the ideas at the end of the day of trying some half smiling and some willing hands, trying some opposite action, and if nothing else, having your self-talk switch to, let's give it a try. And seeing what that does in terms of helping you get towards a more willing place than a willful place. Okay, so for homework, I think back a little bit to when we were talking about radical acceptance last week, because radical acceptance, again, is like this big, big skill. And that's why for homework, part of what I said last time was there may or may not be a chance to practice radical acceptance in your life. If you're grappling with something really big, you can think about what radical acceptance might look like for that situation. And that's why, as part of homework, I said you could think back on what your radical acceptance story is, like Kate and I shared our stories. So that was why I went there for radical acceptance, because it's so big. But when it comes to willingness is something that I can almost guarantee there will be ample opportunities to practice this during your week. Probably at least one opportunity a day where there's something that comes up in your life that's not going according to your plan. Something that you don't like, you wish was different, and you're able to maybe catch yourself thinking, ooh, it shouldn't be this way. It wasn't supposed to be like that. I don't want to do that. That kind of a thing. So notice your self-talk, like we talked about. Notice when you're being willful, and practice turning your mind towards some willingness and see how that goes. So that's your homework for this week. And I'm going to go into all the things. So email us if you have questions, life scenarios that you want to throw our way to get feedback on. dbtandmepodcast@gmail.com. Consider donating to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/dbtandme. Consider buying merch. I'll call it merch. Why not? Consider buying merch on our Etsy, which is DBT and Me. So you can just go to etsy.com and search DBT and Me, all one word. And rate us or write us a review on Apple Podcasts or any of the other platforms that you listen on if they have that option for you to do so. Okay, and now let's get into closing moment.
Okay, so closing moment time. All right, as always, start by just finding a comfortable position. This can be sitting, standing, laying down, whatever feels good to you and your body right now. Just something that you can kind of relax into, be comfortable doing for the next few minutes. Now, we're going to tune into our breath. You don't have to breathe any more deeply or any more slowly than you do naturally. It's just about noticing. Just about paying attention to the breath and allowing it to welcome us into our bodies and into the present moment. Now, I'd like for you to bring to mind an image. This can be either yourself when you were a teenager, or if you prefer, you can also bring to mind sort of a stereotypical teenager, teenage icon of some sort. Whatever for you is going to best bring to mind an embodiment or a real felt sense of the presence and the attitude of being a teenager. This could also be a representation of your inner teenager, which I do believe we all still have hanging out inside of us somewhere. When you have that image brought into your mind's eye, I want you to take a moment and just check it out. Just hang out with this past self or this inner self or this sort of icon or stereotype, and just remember what it's like. Take a look at the posture and the attitude and everything that this being is embodying. As you do that, harken back to our description of willfulness and see if you can spot that willfulness in this teenage figure standing before you. And now I'd like you to do two things with this teenager standing before you. One, I'd like you to try and remember a time that you as a teenager or your inner teenager let go of that stubbornness and had some fun. Maybe enjoyed an outing with family that you didn't think you would, or a school project or assignment or trip. Just something that you expected to be kind of shitty, kind of boring, uninteresting, but instead turned out to be a good time. Kind of remember what that felt like. Remember the surprise and the enjoyment of that unexpected happiness. Does remembering that change this image in front of you at all? Does this teenager have a different posture or a different expression? I don't even know, maybe different clothes. No right or wrong answers. I'm just curious. Just checking out to see if they look any different or has changed at all by bringing to mind this memory of an unexpected good time. The other thing I'd love for you to do is ask this teenager what it wants. What does it need? What would help it let go of that stubborn, willful stance, posture, attitude? The hint here is that maybe this is something that'll still work for you. Maybe this is something that can still help, whatever this teenager has to say about what helped it let go in that unexpected moment of joy that you were just recalling a moment ago. Or what would help it let go and enjoy itself in future situations. No right or wrong answers, just something to bring a sense of curiosity towards. To look on with your own willingness to hear what this part of you has to say, and to consider what you might be able to do to enact what it's asking for or says that it needs. Just allow yourself to spend a moment there in conversation, in compassion, in empathy with this oftentimes stubborn and willful part of yourself. And see if you can't eke out some wisdom about what might help it and you be more willing in the future. When you feel done with that image, with that conversation, with that time, you can go ahead and let that picture fade from your mind. Let that teenager sink back into the darkness of your unconscious and come back into the present moment. And start by tuning back into your breath, or by stretching or rotating joints, or doing whatever you need to do to kind of come back, to let go of your imagination and come back into the present moment and into your body and into the room. Whenever you feel ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply